In Daniel chapter 9, we read about the prophetic Babylonian captivity of the people of God. The Babylonians come, they destroy the temple, they take the Jewish people and make them slaves and take them away. And that phrase, Babylonian captivity, is sometimes applied to this period in Catholic Church history, 1800 years later. It has nothing to do with Babylon, it has everything to do with France. So let's take a look at the Avignon Papacy, a time period similar to the Babylonian captivity, which is about 70 years. Here we have a period of about 70 years in which the popes, although they're bishops of Rome, are not in Rome. They're living and operating in France under the supervision of the King of France, the Avignon Papacy. So how did this strange situation happen? Well, in 1305, the cardinals elected a Frenchman who took the name Pope Clement V. Now, Pope Clement V did not want to live in Rome. He opted instead, as Bishop of Rome, as Pope, to set up his court in Poitiers in France, and then later in 1309 in Avignon, France. Now, why did he not want to live in Rome? Well, one reason was that in 1307, about 2 years after he was elected Pope, St. John Lateran Basilica, the official cathedral and administrative center of the papacy, burned to the ground. Secondly, there were armed conflicts between the aristocratic families of Rome, and the Pope considered it to be too dangerous for him to live there because of all the assassinations. Now, Clement V, just a little bonus fun fact for you, he's the infamous Pope who suppressed the Knights Templar and executed unjustly its leaders and its members. He's one of the so-called bad popes of Catholic Church history, both because of the Knights Templar and for him initiating the Avignon Papacy. Notably, when he died, his body was placed in a Catholic church which was struck by lightning and caught fire, and part of his body burned. And this was taken as a sign of divine wrath against Clement V. So how does Avignon Papacy continue? Well, you might remember in 1302, just a few years before the election of Clement V, Pope Boniface VIII issued a bull titled Unum Sanctum, and it stated, quote, "It is necessary to salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff," end quote. Now, Philip IV in France, also known as Philip the Fair, rejected this decree. And so he began to maneuver to have a pro-French papacy. So, with Clement V, we begin a 7-pope sequence in Avignon, and we also begin after that to see anti-popes, men who are not true popes, who are claiming to be popes because of the confusing situation. So we already talked about Clement V. The second one is Pope John the 22nd. He also is a bad pope. He is a material heretic. He denied the beatific vision of the blessed in heaven. So he said the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. Peter, St. Paul, they did not have the beatific vision. This is heretical. His successor, as we'll see, condemned him for this heresy. John the 22nd is also the one that excommunicated Marsilius of Padua and William of Ockham. Marsilius argued that the secular state had absolute power and in the temporal sphere, and the papacy only had power in the spiritual sphere. And Marsilius had a bunch of other odd views that were probably rightly condemned. But William of Ockham himself, and we've covered him in a previous NSTI lesson, he charged John the 22nd with 70 errors and 7 heresies. Not surprisingly, he was excommunicated by John the 22nd. The next pope is Benedict XII. He's actually one of the good Avignon popes. He was against nepotism. He condemned the heresy of his predecessor, John the 22nd. He tried to reconcile the Greek Orthodox to Rome unsuccessfully. And he's known for his careful and conscientious work against the Albigensian heretics in the south of France. Not surprisingly, Philip IV did not like him, which is a good sign, right? The fourth is Pope Clement VI. He's the Pope during the Black Death. We have a new St. Thomas Institute lesson on the Black Death. Highly encourage you to see that one. Unfortunately, he was known for his luxurious lifestyle and his attire, and he also spent up all the money in the papal treasury, listed usually as one of the bad popes. The next one is Innocent VI, and he condemned the teaching that the College of Cardinals had authority over the Pope. The next one is Urban V. Notably, Urban V is a blessed. He was beatified, and he returned to Rome in 1367, the first pope to step inside his own diocese of Rome in 60 years. But he returned to Avignon in 1370 and died soon after. The next pope is Gregory XI. He is important because he's the one who brings the Avignon papacy to an end. He's also the pope that St. Catherine of Siena writes letters to, urging him to resolve this error and bring the papacy back to Rome. And so you'll see in the next lesson is on St. Catherine of Siena. Finally, on September 13th, 1376, Gregory XI, taking the exhortation and advice of Catherine of Siena, leaves Avignon to go to Rome, and he reestablishes the papacy and the Roman Curia in Rome on January 17th, 1377. This, by the way, is why you'll see the Avignon captivity listed as being ending in either 1376 or 1377. 76 is when he left, 77 is when he arrived in Rome. Now, there was a series of invalid anti-popes contesting the new line in Rome. So the valid popes in Rome are these: Pope Urban VI, Boniface IX, Innocent VII, Gregory XII. All four are valid. Meanwhile, there continued to be a false line of popes back in Avignon. These would be Clement VII and Benedict XIII, not true popes, anti-popes. And then there was another line of fake popes, anti-popes, in Pisa, where the Leaning Tower of Pisa is, anti-pope Alexander V and anti-pope John the 23rd. Finally, and by the way, this is called the Great Schism of the Western Church, because you have looks like three popes. It's only one real pope, two fake popes, disputing over who is the one true pope. The Council of Constance brings this debate to an end in 1417 and elects Pope Martin V. Finally, the Avignon papacy is over. The Great Schism that followed it is over. We finally have a little bit of stability moving into the 1400s in the Catholic Church. So what's our assessment of this? Well, first of all, it was sparked off by Boniface's Unum Sanctum, which says it's necessary for salvation for every human creature to be subject to the Roman pontiff. What does subject to mean? Is it political or is it merely doctrinal? It seems that from Vatican I, it is doctrinal, not necessarily has to do with politics. But this confusion brings about a giant struggle, especially with France and Philip IV. Also, the Great Schism. When you do apologetics, you'll sometimes hear people say, well, at one point there were three popes. How do you Catholics get around that? You have to clarify and say, no, there were not three popes. There was one true pope and two false popes, two fake popes. Just because three men claim to be pope doesn't mean that there are three popes. There's one pope and two false popes. And then last of all, we see that a great moment of grace, a great moment of conversion in the history of the Catholic Church, perhaps one of the greatest moments of all time, is the return of the papacy back to Rome during the 1300s and into the 1400s. And this happened because of the prayerful letter-writing ministry of St. Catherine of Siena. Sometimes we can think, well, I'm not a cardinal, I'm not a bishop, I'm not a priest, my voice doesn't matter. No, through prayer, through holiness, and maybe even through writing a letter, we can bring about great good in the church. And I think St. Catherine of Siena is the patron saint of that reality. And so in our next lesson, we're going to dedicate a whole unit to St. Catherine of Siena. And since the popes we covered in this lesson were generally not that great, we'll end with St. Catherine of Siena. Pray for us. Thanks for being a member of the New St. Thomas Institute, and we'll see you in the next lesson on St. Catherine.